Caleb Jackson, a 14-year-old teenager, stands at the defendant's table, all alone. His eyes steady, his hands tucked neatly in his lap. Caleb doesn't seem nervous in the slightest. In fact, he stands taller than most grown men would in this situation. The room falls silent. Whispers ripple through the crowd as people exchange puzzled glances, unsure why such a young boy is here without a lawyer. The judge's voice breaks the tension. "Mr. Jackson, this is a serious offense," she says, her tone firm and official. "Not only were you speeding through a school zone, but you also disrespected a police officer. I don't see any legal representation here. Are your parents present?" Caleb, his voice calm yet carrying an undeniable confidence, replies, "No, Your Honor. I'm representing myself." The courtroom goes still. Eyes flicker from Caleb to the judge, waiting for her response. The tension is palpable. How could a 14-year-old stand alone, no lawyer by his side, about to face the consequences of breaking the law? The judge raises an eyebrow, skeptical. And why wouldn't she be? After all, Caleb's no ordinary teenager. He's always been different. An unassuming genius with a memory so sharp, it's like every book he's ever read is etched into his mind. At just 14, Caleb's not your typical student. While others were out riding bikes or worrying about school dances, Caleb was reading Supreme Court cases for fun. His teachers often called him Weird Brain, and the other kids at school mocked him. They didn't understand him. They couldn't see beyond his strange ability to remember everything he read, every case, every legal term. But Caleb never complained. He didn't need to be understood. His books, his dreams, and his quiet genius were enough. Now, here he was, standing alone in a courtroom, ready to face what most kids his age would call a nightmare. But Caleb didn't fear the court. He feared the injustice. Caleb Jackson had always been different. His mind worked in ways that few could comprehend, and while his classmates were preoccupied with sports or socializing, Caleb was buried in his textbooks, devouring every page as if the words themselves held the keys to the universe. His teachers had always been impressed by his sharp intellect, but they didn't quite know what to make of him. To them, he was just the weird brain, the kid who could recite court rulings from memory, who could name every law case and its outcome as easily as others recited song lyrics. But what they didn't realize was that Caleb wasn't just a kid who loved books. He was a force, a mind ready to make a difference in the world. He just needed a chance. That chance came on an ordinary Saturday, one that would quickly spiral into something far from ordinary. Caleb had been riding his bike, enjoying the quiet streets of Pine View. He wasn't headed anywhere in particular, just passing the time on a crisp morning. His backpack, filled with books and a peanut butter sandwich, bounced gently with every bump in the road. It was a peaceful day, until it wasn't. As he pedaled along the sidewalk, a police officer appeared in front of him. The officer, a young man with a shaved head and sunglasses, stepped forward with a stern look. "License?" the officer demanded. "License?" Caleb repeated, confused. "I'm 14. I don't need a license to ride a bike." "You were speeding through a school zone," the officer insisted, pointing to a nearby sign that Caleb knew well. "I wasn't near a school," Caleb protested, his voice calm but confused. "It's Saturday. No kids are around. The school zone's not in effect today." But the officer wasn't listening. He'd already begun scribbling on his ticket pad. Caleb, wanting nothing more than to clear up the misunderstanding, simply asked for clarification. He wasn't being rude. He wasn't arguing. He was asking a simple question. But the officer didn't see it that way. "Name," the officer barked. Caleb hesitated. "Why do I need a ticket? I didn't do anything wrong." The officer's face hardened. "Name now." And just like that, Caleb found himself being ticketed for something he knew wasn't his fault. But it wasn't just the ticket that stung. The officer had added a line to the form: "Contempt of officer." Contempt of officer? Caleb couldn't believe it. He hadn't done anything wrong, let alone disrespected an officer. He didn't fight back. He didn't raise his voice. But now, this small misunderstanding was escalating into something far worse. Something that might cost him a fine, hours of community service, and a permanent mark on his record. Walking home that day, his bike locked up in police custody, Caleb felt a fire burning inside him, not anger, but something deeper. It wasn't just about the ticket or the officer, it was about justice. He knew he was in the right, and he wasn't going to let this go. This wasn't just about proving that he hadn't broken the law, it was about showing the world that even a teenager could stand up to an injustice. He wasn't going to let this misunderstanding define him. And that night, as the world around him slept, Caleb pulled out his books again, court rulings, Georgia law, even the Constitution of the United States, and started reading. He wasn't trying to win a battle. He was trying to learn how to fight the war, and when morning came, he knew exactly what he had to do. He wasn't going to pay the fine. He wasn't going to let this slide. He was going to fight. For himself, for his future, and maybe, just maybe, for the world that didn't understand him. As Caleb closed his law books that night, he made a vow. The courtroom wouldn't just hear his voice, they would hear the truth, and that truth would echo louder than any fine, any ticket, or any officer's word. For the next few days, Caleb didn't let up. The weight of the ticket, the contempt charge, it all sat on his shoulders like a challenge he couldn't ignore. But instead of stewing over it or letting it defeat him, Caleb dove into his books even deeper. He didn't just study the case law, he devoured it. Pages of legal texts filled his desk, a collection of court cases, statutes, and legal precedents. He memorized everything he could find about Georgia law, becoming fluent in the language of lawyers, judges, and rulings. He wasn't just preparing for a case, he was preparing for a battle. Nights blurred into mornings as Caleb pored over videos of real trials, watching how lawyers presented evidence, how they made their arguments, how they made objections. Every moment he could spare, he spent absorbing the mechanics of a courtroom, how every word, every movement could sway a case in one direction or another. The more he watched, the more he understood. He wasn't just learning, he was training his mind to think like a lawyer. A teenager who once dreamed of being a lawyer now had the tools to become one. But as Caleb dove deeper into his studies, he learned something crucial, something that would change the entire course of the battle ahead. In Georgia, minors were allowed to represent themselves in municipal court, provided the judge agreed to it. At first, Caleb didn't believe it. He double-checked the law, cross-referenced it with cases from other states, and made sure it was true. He even read sections about self-representation in higher courts, and there it was, clear as day. Minors could represent themselves in municipal court if the judge permitted it. The realization hit Caleb like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just a misunderstanding that needed clearing up. This was his opportunity. If he could convince the judge, if he could prove his capability, he could stand up in court and fight this ticket, this charge, without a lawyer by his side. He could represent himself, argue his case, and perhaps even change the way people saw him. The world wouldn't just see Caleb Jackson, the quiet, weird brain from Pine View. They would see Caleb Jackson, the young attorney, armed with the law and the truth. But Caleb didn't take this lightly. If he was going to walk into that courtroom, he had to be prepared, not just with knowledge, but with strategy. He studied objections, motions, defenses. He practiced his arguments in front of the mirror, saying them out loud until they flowed naturally. He created flashcards with legal terms, making sure every word was ingrained in his mind, that every phrase was ready at his fingertips. He wasn't just preparing to defend himself, he was preparing to win. And so Caleb crafted a plan, a strategy that went beyond just arguing the facts. He wasn't going to just get the ticket dismissed. He was going to expose the flaws in the officer's actions, in the law itself, and make the case that this was an injustice that needed to be addressed. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. No one would take him seriously. But Caleb wasn't backing down. The day of the hearing came fast, and Caleb stood before his mirror one last time, straightening his button-up shirt, adjusting his glasses. He wasn't just Caleb anymore. He was an attorney in disguise, ready to face whatever came his way in that courtroom. He had the law, he had the knowledge, and he had something more important than all of that: the truth. Caleb stepped into the courtroom, his heart pounding but his face unwavering. He had come this far, studied the law, rehearsed his arguments, and now it was time to face the judge. As he walked past the rows of benches, the eyes of the courtroom followed him, skeptical glances and quiet murmurs. Caleb felt the weight of their doubt. How could a 14-year-old stand here alone, no lawyer at his side, trying to navigate the complex maze of the justice system? They didn't know him, not really. They didn't know the depth of his preparation or the power of his mind. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, glanced down at Caleb, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Jackson," she began, her voice firm, "you're representing yourself today?" "Yes, Your Honor," Caleb replied, his voice calm but sure. The judge's eyebrow arched. She looked at the officer who had ticketed Caleb, then back at the young boy standing confidently before her. "Very well," she said, sounding almost amused. "Proceed." There was a moment of hesitation. Caleb had practiced this over and over again. He had written his motion to dismiss with the precision of a seasoned attorney. But now, in front of all these eyes, it felt real. He took a deep breath, walked to the front of the courtroom, and handed his legal brief to the clerk. The rustling of paper seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence that followed. The judge took the papers, flipping through them slowly. Her face began to change. "Objection, Your Honor," Caleb said suddenly, his voice ringing clear and strong. The judge looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Objection?" She clearly didn't expect to hear this from a teenager. "You're objecting to the fine and the community service?" Caleb nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe the charges are based on an incorrect application of the law. I've outlined my argument in the brief I submitted." The courtroom fell silent. The judge flipped through the pages with a growing sense of surprise, her expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue. The legal language was precise, clear, and impressively sophisticated, far beyond what anyone could expect from someone Caleb's age. As the judge continued reading, Caleb stood tall, unflinching. He wasn't just waiting for a ruling. He was presenting a case. He had meticulously outlined how the officer had failed to properly assess the situation, how the school zone laws didn't apply on a Saturday morning, and how Caleb's actions hadn't warranted contempt of officer charges. With each point he made, the judge's face softened, her stern demeanor cracking just a little bit more. Caleb was no longer just some kid who'd wandered into a courtroom by accident. He was making a compelling case, one that forced the judge to reconsider everything she thought she knew about this trial. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as Caleb laid out the evidence. He had timestamps, GPS data from his phone, and even traffic camera footage. Caleb's arguments were sharp, and the evidence he presented was irrefutable. The officer's actions were not only flawed, but they were also, in Caleb's words, a gross misuse of authority. The room grew still as the judge looked up, her eyes now filled with genuine respect. "You've certainly done your research," the judge said, her voice less stern than before, but still unsure of how to proceed. "This is impressive, but I still need to think about it." Just as the judge was about to make her decision, the courtroom doors suddenly burst open, loud enough to make everyone jump. The noise cut through the tension like a knife. Heads turned toward the door as the sound of footsteps echoed through the room. A figure stepped inside, tall and composed, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the courtroom. The room held its collective breath. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't part of the plan. The judge looked up, confused. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice less firm now, filled with uncertainty. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around the courtroom, his gaze landing on Caleb, then on the judge. The tension in the air thickened, as if everyone in the room knew something big was about to unfold. The man stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he approached the front of the room. "I'm here to speak about this case," he said quietly, "and about this boy." The courtroom gasped. The judge, visibly shaken now, turned to Caleb. "Who is he?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb's throat went dry as he looked up at the man, his mind racing. But before he could answer, the figure in the doorway spoke again. "I'm the U.S. Attorney General. I've been following Caleb's work, and I believe we need to hear him out before making any decisions." The room fell into stunned silence. The unexpected arrival of the U.S. Attorney General was nothing short of a bombshell. The judge's confusion was evident as she stared at the man, her mind clearly racing. The officer who had ticketed Caleb sat up straighter, his eyes wide with disbelief. Caleb, however, stood unmoved, his eyes locked on the Attorney General. This wasn't just about winning his case anymore. Something much bigger was at play. And with that, the courtroom knew the game had changed. The courtroom was frozen in shock as the U.S. Attorney General stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. He looked around, his gaze settling on Caleb, who stood tall and calm at the defendant's table. The whispers that had been rippling through the room quieted into complete stillness as the weight of the moment began to settle in. The judge, still processing what was happening, finally managed to speak, her voice almost trembling. I don't understand. Who are you?" she asked, looking from the man to Caleb. "I'm the U.S. Attorney General," the man replied, his voice steady, unwavering. "And I've been following this young man's work for quite some time now." The courtroom seemed to collectively inhale. The idea that the U.S. Attorney General was involved in a local court case was mind-boggling enough, but the way he was speaking about Caleb, it was as if this case was more than just a routine traffic violation. The murmurs in the room grew louder, filled with confusion and curiosity. Was this some kind of joke? Or was Caleb really someone special? The judge, now clearly unsettled, leaned forward in her chair, her eyes flicking between Caleb and the Attorney General. "What do you mean, you've been following his work?" Caleb didn't flinch. He had known something big was happening, but now, in the face of this unexpected revelation, his confidence soared. The judge might have been taken aback, but Caleb wasn't. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. This was no longer just about a ticket or a fine. It was about something much bigger. "I'm not just a teenager, Your Honor," Caleb said, his voice clear and strong, echoing across the room. "I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law for a while now, even if no one knew it." The words hung in the air, each one like a bombshell. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps, confusion, and disbelief. The officer who had ticketed Caleb stared in shock, unable to believe what he was hearing. The judge blinked, then blinked again, her eyes narrowing as if trying to process the words. But Caleb wasn't done. He took a step forward, his motion to dismiss still in play, and began to speak with the authority of someone who had spent years in the legal world, because, in many ways, he had. His arguments, his reasoning, his knowledge of the law, it was all there, laid out in front of him like a perfectly executed case. This wasn't just a teenager standing in front of the court. This was someone who had spent countless hours studying the law, learning its intricacies, its loopholes, and its power. And now, it was all coming together. The judge remained silent, her face still frozen in disbelief, but Caleb could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just surprised by his words, she was captivated. And in that moment, the whole room shifted. The disbelief wasn't just about Caleb's age. It was about the revelation that he had been playing by a different set of rules. A set of rules far beyond what anyone had imagined for someone his age. The U.S. Attorney General stepped forward again, his expression thoughtful. "What Caleb is showing here today," he said, his voice filled with a quiet respect, "is not just the work of a teenager trying to defend himself. It's the work of a young mind who understands the law better than many seasoned professionals. He's done something here that many in the legal world have failed to do. He's made us rethink what we believe about the justice system." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the entire room was silent. The judge, who had been ready to dismiss Caleb as just another kid trying to get out of trouble, now saw him in a new light. This wasn't just about a legal case. This was about the future of law, and Caleb had just shown them all that his potential stretched far beyond anything they could have expected. The Attorney General glanced at the judge, his voice steady but laced with meaning. "This young man is destined for something great, a future in law, in justice. He'll change the world. We'll see to that." Caleb stood tall, his heart racing, but his demeanor remained calm. The courtroom was left in stunned silence, not just by the shock of the situation, but by the truth of what had just been revealed. Caleb Jackson, the quiet teenager who had been underestimated for so long, was no longer just a defendant. He was a force to be reckoned with. And as the tension in the room reached its peak, Caleb knew this was only the beginning. His journey wasn't just about winning today, it was about changing the very system he had once only read about. And as the U.S. Attorney General's words echoed in his mind, Caleb realized something else. This was just the start of his fight for justice. As the courtroom still buzzed with the aftermath of Caleb's shocking revelation, the doors opened once again. This time, it wasn't just a figure stepping into the room. It was a woman who, at first glance, looked nothing like the kind of person you'd expect to walk into a courtroom at such a critical moment. But it wasn't just her appearance that stunned Caleb. It was the sudden jolt in his chest, the recognition that pierced through the noise. His heart skipped a beat. He knew that face. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The whispers in the room faded as Caleb's breath caught in his throat. Standing at the back of the courtroom, her eyes locked with his, was his mother. Her presence felt like a thunderclap in the midst of the storm that had been Caleb's day. He hadn't seen her in years, not since he was just a child. She'd disappeared from his life when he was 6. And every memory of her had been lost to time, buried beneath layers of confusion and heartbreak. She was supposed to be gone. But there she was, alive, standing in front of him, and every ounce of his reality shifted. The judge, still reeling from the shock of Caleb's brilliance, blinked rapidly as she took in the woman's appearance. "Ma'am, may I ask what—" But she was interrupted. "I'm here because someone told me my son was in trouble," the woman said, her voice soft but firm, almost like a plea. The words hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. He stumbled slightly, his eyes wide, still processing the sight of her after all these years. His mother, the woman who had been gone from his life, the one he had never truly understood, was standing in front of him. He could feel the flood of emotions rising in his chest, confusion, anger, relief, all battling for control. The room was filled with questions, but Caleb couldn't focus on anything but her. Why didn't you tell me you were alive?" His voice cracked, a mixture of pain and disbelief slipping through. His mother didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a slow step forward, her eyes filled with a sadness Caleb couldn't quite comprehend. She reached into her bag, pulling out a folder and setting it gently on the defense table. "I tried, Caleb," she whispered. "I tried to get to you, but everything was taken from me, and I had to stay away to keep you safe." Caleb's heart raced as he opened the folder, his hands trembling. Inside, there were documents, court records, prison files, and FBI transcripts. The words blurred in front of his eyes, but one thing was clear. His mother hadn't just disappeared. She had been framed for a crime she didn't commit. "I wasn't supposed to be in there, Caleb," she continued, her voice tight. "I was framed for embezzlement by the company I worked for. They planted evidence against me. They silenced me, and they kept me from you." The courtroom around them seemed to fade as Caleb absorbed the weight of what his mother was telling him. He had always wondered why she had left, why she was never there for him. He had told himself stories, convinced himself that maybe she didn't want to be part of his life. But now, it became clear. It wasn't her choice. "I didn't know what happened to you, Caleb," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I tried to write to you, to send you letters, but they intercepted everything. I had no way of knowing if you were safe, if you were even alive. Until I saw that video of your mock trial at school. That's when I knew. I had to find you." Caleb sat back in his chair, the documents still in his hands. His mind was racing, piecing together the puzzle of his family's broken past. All these years, he had thought his mother was just gone, that she had simply walked away from him. But the truth was far darker. She had been silenced, locked away behind a wall of lies. "But why didn't Grandma Evelyn tell me? Why didn't she?" Caleb's voice trailed off, the question hanging in the air. His mother's eyes filled with sorrow as she looked at him. "Grandma Evelyn thought I died in a car accident. That's what the police told her. They told her I was gone, and I couldn't do anything to change that." Caleb's chest tightened, the weight of this revelation nearly unbearable. All these years, he had been carrying the weight of a lie that had shaped everything he thought he knew about the world. His mother hadn't abandoned him. She hadn't chosen to stay away. She had been taken from him. A quiet anger began to rise in him. This wasn't just a family tragedy. This was part of something much bigger. The same people who had wronged his mother, who had framed her, erased her from his life, were the same people who had pushed Caleb into this courtroom today. The same corrupt system, the same hidden forces, the same conspiracy. "I need to know everything," Caleb said, his voice low but determined. He looked at his mother, his heart heavy with the weight of her past, but his mind already spinning with the connections. How did this happen? How are we connected to all of this? As his mother sat down beside him, she began to tell him everything she knew, the truth about the company that had framed her, the people who had silenced her, and the system that had turned a blind eye. And the more Caleb listened, the more he began to piece it all together. His family's struggles were not just personal, they were part of something much darker, something much larger than they could have ever imagined. And as the courtroom buzzed with confusion, Caleb's resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his mother, his family, and the conspiracy that had haunted them for years. The fight for justice was no longer a question of winning a ticket case. It was a fight for truth, a fight for his family, and a fight that Caleb Jackson was determined to win. As the days passed after his dramatic courtroom showdown, Caleb thought he could finally breathe. His mother was back in his life, and he had exposed the flaws in the legal system. But deep down, he knew this victory was just the beginning. The truth was starting to come to light, but there was a deeper, darker truth that Caleb had yet to uncover. One evening, after a long day of legal research and phone calls with his mother about what to do next, Caleb came home to a strange, unmarked envelope waiting for him. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost too perfect. His name was written across the front in dark ink, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw it. He opened it carefully, unsure of what to expect, but the words inside sent a chill down his spine. The letter was short, to the point. "We've been watching you, Caleb Jackson. You've stirred something bigger than you realize. The game is not over, it has just begun. You're not the first to challenge the system, and you won't be the last. But understand this. Your victory is temporary." The circle doesn't like being exposed. Your next move will be your last if you're not careful. Caleb's hands trembled as he read the words again, and then again. The circle. Who were they? What did this shadowy organization have to do with his family, with the wrongful conviction of his mother, and with the ticket he had fought in court? His mind raced, trying to connect the dots. He had suspected something larger at play, but this letter confirmed it. Someone had been pulling strings behind the scenes, and now they knew he was coming for them. They were watching him, and now, it seemed, they were threatening to take everything away. The letter ended with a chilling sentence. You have 48 hours. If you want to see your family safe again, stop digging. Leave this alone. The silence in the room felt suffocating as Caleb stared at the letter, the weight of the words sinking in. He knew the circle wasn't just an abstract idea. It was real, and it had power. The kind of power that could make people disappear, erase evidence, and control the very system Caleb was fighting to change. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when he was so close to uncovering the full truth. He had already exposed some of the corruption, but this was something much bigger. It wasn't just about his mother's wrongful conviction anymore. It was about an entire system, an organization that operated in the shadows, pulling the strings behind the curtain. Caleb knew he couldn't back down, not after everything he had learned, not after everything he had fought for. The next morning, Caleb woke to the sound of his phone buzzing. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the message from his mother. Caleb, something's not right. They're watching. I saw a car outside the house last night, and I know it's not just a coincidence. We need to be careful. His stomach twisted with worry. The circle wasn't just playing games anymore. They were sending a message, a threat that Caleb could feel creeping closer with every passing second. He couldn't let them hurt his family. Not again. And then, as if on cue, Caleb's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. Hesitant, he answered it. A voice on the other end was calm, cold, and familiar. You think you can expose us, Caleb? The voice asked, its tone smooth like ice. You've done some damage, but now the clock is ticking. You've got 24 hours to stop, or we make sure the people you love are no longer safe. A cold dread settled in Caleb's chest. A countdown. His mind raced. This wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. As the voice hung up, Caleb's world shifted. He was no longer fighting just to clear his name or his mother's. He was fighting to survive. The circle wasn't just going to sit back and let him uncover the truth. They were coming for him. And this time, they were ready to make him pay. Caleb had no time to waste. He had 24 hours. The clock was ticking, and if he didn't act fast, the people he cared about most would be in danger. The stakes had never been higher, and Caleb knew that the next move he made could be the most important of his life. With the weight of the world on his shoulders, Caleb had no choice but to race against time, and against the shadows of the circle that were closing in on him, threatening everything he had worked for. The countdown had begun. As Caleb stared at the ticking clock on his phone, the weight of the situation settled in. Every second that passed brought him closer to an impossible decision, one that could change everything. The circle wasn't just an organization anymore. It was a web of power and corruption, so deeply entrenched that even Caleb's relentless pursuit of justice seemed insignificant against its vast influence. They weren't playing by the same rules. They never had been. His mother's life, his own safety, his future, they were all on the line now. Caleb had fought to expose the truth, but the deeper he dug, the more dangerous the game became. The circle had shown him how far they would go to silence him, to protect their secrets, and Caleb knew that if he didn't act fast, there would be no one left to fight for. The time was running out. As Caleb looked at the message on his phone, the countdown ticking down to the final seconds, he made his choice. There was no going back now. He had come too far, uncovered too much, and revealed too many truths to stop. The battle wasn't just about exposing the circle anymore. It was about survival. It was about ensuring that the world knew the truth, no matter the cost. Caleb Jackson had started as a teenager fighting a traffic ticket. Now he was fighting for his life, for justice, and for a future that seemed more uncertain than ever. And with that, Caleb prepared for his next move, knowing that the world was watching, and the truth he carried was more dangerous than ever. The countdown had started, and Caleb was ready to make his move, no matter what came next. If you're hooked by Caleb's story and want to see what happens next, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned, because the truth is far from over, and you won't want to miss the next chapter in this incredible journey.